If you are in financial services, perhaps, you don't necessarily need to just pivot to being an AI company, but you need to understand how this stuff works and start integrating it, because companies that lag on that are going to have a much harder time, and this stuff will move exponentially faster. Like, people will expect it.
Cortney sits at the intersection of media, technology, and labor, not as a futurist predicting what might happen, but as an operator who's built and deployed immersive systems where outcomes actually matter. She's worked inside large technology organizations and alongside frontline teams designing AI and spatial computing-based learning systems that work, systems that don't just demonstrate what's possible, but change how people behave under real-world pressure. Her work has been used across healthcare, safety, and enterprise environments where training failures have real consequences. She's also the author of The Spatial Race, really good book, which makes a clear argument that spatial computing is not a destination or a trend. It's becoming infrastructure for how we learn, work, and transfer knowledge, and that shift has implications most organizations are still underestimating. This conversation is not about the metaverse as an idea. It's about what breaks when immersive technology stays in pilot mode, what it takes to scale systems instead of demos, and what operators need to understand as learning and labor quietly get rebuilt underneath us. Cortney, thank you so much for coming on the Media Machine podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
What made you write a book, The Spatial Race? Tell us about this journey for you.
What made me write the book was the person who published it yelled at me a lot and thanked me and convinced me to do it. So I have a background in journalism, and I've written books before on different topics, my previous career. I always thought, oh, I should write another book and I should really write something in the space. And it was always a back burner. And the person who published my book, we co-wrote a book together. Based on that, the head of this company basically was like, you really need to do your own book. This will help you. And it was a lot of work, but it really helped me, I think, codify a lot of my ideas. It was a really fun process. Some of the time it was really painful, but I think it really helps me codify my ideas and put the vision that I have for the next 10 years of computing into a much more sort of clarified format and bring everything together.
Throughout the book and throughout some of the interviews I heard you speak at, you talk a lot about pilot purgatory. First of all, what is that from your perspective? And what do you think usually breaks inside an organization before any of the immersive systems can scale if they embrace the technology?
Yeah, so pilot purgatory is the idea that a company does something, it does ideally, right? They do something new and experimental and different, and then it just sits there. So a lot
we know that very well.
Yeah, I think anyone who's been in emerging tech spaces knows that really well. So companies tend to follow the herd a lot of the time. So you'll see everyone doing VR for a little bit, and then everyone has a metaverse world for some reason. And everyone all of a sudden has an NFT for some reason. And now everyone's doing AI. And what it boils down to is what I like to call performing innovation. So the CEO of your Fortune 500 company wants to be able to get up on a big stage wherever they are in the world and say, oh, we're so future focused and we're doing all this really interesting creative stuff, when in fact they're generally not. I have a friend who works at a big company, a big financial services company, and she let me listen in on her end of year town hall. And when they got to the part where they were talking about AI, it was really fascinating because this is a big Fortune 100 company. And they were like, we got Copilot for everyone. So everyone use Copilot. And it's okay. Copilot's fine. Nothing against Copilot. It's good. But that was like their big AI innovation, was like, we paid Microsoft for Copilot. And then what they talked about was they had little pockets and little divisions were doing interesting things. And they had some good case studies about one division was using it to build personas, right? So ChatGPT would build personas for them. Super interesting, great case study. Another one was using it to run really large complex models and do deep research. And so there's all these like interesting little things, but they were very siloed. And there was no sense of the org scaling it, growing it, doing anything really interesting with it. And I think that's where we're at today, is you have people operating in silos. And that really leads back to the idea of pilot purgatory, because what has happened in my case, time again, is somebody will be really interested in this technology, whether it's virtual reality, AI, spatial computing, smart glasses, whatever it is. They bring me in, we do a project, it goes really well, and then that person like leaves or gets laid off, or they work on another project, right? And so when companies are thinking about this stuff, they're not thinking big picture long term. And that's where things really start to peter out a lot of the time. And so my advice and the thing that I'm working really hard on is like, how do you build with scale in mind? Like, obviously you build pilots, you build small things to start to test. That is how you learn and grow. But then how do you have a trigger mechanism in place so if something does succeed, it can go wide?
Yeah, I feel like I know exactly what you're saying I've seen it from both sides, from internal like networks. So Julie and I both worked at Viacom, and I was a VP of production planning and operations, and I oversaw a lot of the immersive and emerging technology projects. And then we had an innovation team. And unfortunately, you're right. Everything you're saying, you're right. It's the pilots disappear if the ambassadors of the project is no longer in that department, in that company, and then these amazing projects just disappear.
Yeah. That happens even as a producer. It's like you shepherd a project for a year and then someone gets laid off and there goes your project.
I had a story where a couple of years ago I built something for Meta and it was this amazing VR training piece. It was super exciting. And we turned it in on a Friday. And I think that following Wednesday, every single person on that team was laid off.
Oh, that's when that happened.
So Meta does this periodically, but yeah, one of the big layoffs. And look, the upside is we completed the project and got paid for it. So cool. Like on one hand, it's fine. We got what we needed to get done. But on the other hand, it was a really good project that we put a lot of work into, a lot of effort into. There was a lot of excitement around it. And it's sitting on a hard drive somewhere. And I think that's the challenge is companies are just pivoting so much and they'll start things, they'll abandon things, they'll start things, they'll abandon things. And what that does is it creates a lot of churn and a lot of uncertainty, and it doesn't create a safe place for people to grow and build and experiment and usher in this new wave of technology.
Especially inside the big networks or in large companies, why so many people, like small startups, are doing so much more and disrupting so much more and transforming so much more because they don't have the many layers of authority, approval.
How many pilot technologies do you think exists per a green light? Like 10?
Before getting to green light?
Yeah. How much technology is out there that will never see the light of day, for example? And let's just say in a year.
Oh my God, tons. It's really shocking, especially in the VR space. I was thinking about this yesterday because I was talking to my friend Gabo Aurora, who is a brilliant VR director and creator, and he's been in this space longer than most people. He has built projects that were revolutionary that are unavailable completely. So he built something really amazing for Magic Leap, and they showed it at one film festival. And then if you were friends with Gabo, and I'm fortunate enough to be friends with Gabo, I went over to his apartment and did the demo in his living room in the Magic Leap. Now, Magic Leap has leapt into the great beyond. This piece, which was amazing, is just vanished. And when I look back, there's so much interesting stuff out there that it's lost to time. And I'm like, there's no VR version of the Wayback Machine, unfortunately, at least the internet cataloging for good or bad. But there's so many things that they'll get far along and then they'll lose the executive sponsor, or they'll get far along and then no one will pick it up. Or I think that's the nature of the beast, right? Not everything is going to make it to production. And that's fine. But I do think, again, we're in this period right now where it's this really interesting contradiction where on one hand, every executive you talk to, like if you were at CES or Davos in a couple of weeks, every executive is going to be talking about innovation and change and growth and AI and the next blah, blah, blah. But very few of them are actually investing in it in a strategic way or even doing it. I guarantee that if you go to Davos in a couple of weeks, you talk to these executives, they're going to talk about AI and it'll be like they paid for Copilot. They paid for ChatGPT. They are encouraging people to vibe code with Lovable. They're not thinking about it big picture, strategic, long-term embedded. They're thinking, oh yeah, we'll just give Microsoft a little bit more money and everyone can just figure it out.
Yeah.
So let's shift to when you're designing things. What do you take into account besides the technology, like the humanity, the ethics of it all? How do you approach it?
So the technology comes last, right? I work with technology, but technology is a tool. And one thing that I've noticed in the last 10 years, maybe 10, 15 years, is a lot of engineer-led companies lead with product. So this is something that Google is doing right now with their new headset. So Google has this pretty great new headset with Samsung. But if you look at their marketing, they lead with product specs, right? They lead with, it's got this chip and this vision and this, that. No one cares, guys. No one cares. No one is going to spend, whatever, $2,000 on a headset because of a chip. What does this headset do for me? What problem does it solve for me? So I'm going to pick on Google for a second here. They put out this video where, first of all, the person in the video, no offense to him, but he sounds like he's reading off a hostage statement. Like he's not camera trained, media trained, whatever. But then he talks about spatialize your photos. You can spatialize your photos. Guess what? We know what that means. No one else does. But if he said, whoever said, hey, your kid's first birthday party, you can record it and relive it in this headset with depth that makes you feel like you are there. Every parent, every grandparent on earth is
I've got the chills thinking about it.
Right?
Yeah.
I have a Vision Pro right here sitting next to me. So I got the Vision Pro when I was visiting my parents. That was the day it came out. I just happened to be visiting them. And so I bought it and I recorded a bunch of stuff on it, including my niece and nephew. And then I showed it to my mom. And my mom was like, I need to get one of these so that I can stand on the sidelines of the soccer game, hands free, record it, and then watch it back. But no one is talking about that. No one is telling those type of stories. And so where we're getting really stuck with a lot of this stuff is the fact that no one is clearly communicating what problem does this solve. So to get back to your original question, that's the first place I start. What problem are we solving? What are we doing? How are we making something better? Right? So I have a framework that I do every time I lead a corporate workshop. And the first framework is, what's the problem? Should be simple, actually isn't. It takes a lot of teeth pulling. And then the even harder question, which is really teeth pulling, is why is this a problem? Because technology cannot solve every problem. Now, in some cases, the problem exists because technology to solve the problem has not been available until then. So that's the great situation. The bad situation is all our employees are leaving, and it's you start digging and you're like, but it has nothing to do with training. It has to do with the fact that you pay under market rates or that you're a terrible place to work with toxic leadership. And I'm sorry, VR cannot solve that. It can help, right? We can do leadership training in VR or something like that, but your problem is bigger than just putting on a headset. So it's defining the problem, defining the reason for the problem, then creating a solution based on that and really digging deep into, are we trying to solve for a skill or are we trying to solve for behavior? Because those are two pretty different things. So creating a solution based around that. And then the deployment phase of it, right? And then again, getting to that thing I was talking about earlier, how do you create a trigger mechanism? So if your initial pilot works well, then you scale fast. And so that's where I really start with it. And yeah, obviously I consider accessibility a big issue. The ethics of it are a big issue, right? How do we create stuff that is sustainable? How do we create stuff that is not biased? We do a lot of training around very sensitive topics. So racial bias, workplace exclusion, those type of things. How do we create training in a responsible way that also is very emotionally impactful? That's always a thing that we work on. And now as I think more about smart glasses, how do we create for smart glasses in a way that is additive, but not overwhelming? If you haven't seen this already, there's a short film on YouTube called Hyper Reality. It's about 10 years old. And it's this kind of nightmare vision of AR glasses where it's just
everything is alive around you.
It's flashing directly into your eyeballs and your brain 24/7. And we don't want that. We want smart, useful, contextual information presented in a safe way. So we're not just walking into traffic because our smart glasses are blinding us.
How far did you get? Some of the projects that you guys were doing at Meta, how far did you guys get with some of those? The Ray-Ban glasses, for example. Did you guys work on any of those projects?
So a lot of the stuff that I work on is out in the world in various places. But yeah, again, it's a tough distribution challenge on the headsets for sure. And I think it'll probably be a little bit easier on the glasses based on stuff that I've worked on, stuff that I've seen, because it's just a little bit of a different distribution mechanism.
You said something really so smart. A lot of people don't think this way, is the technology is the last thing that you should be thinking about, because you really need to be thinking about, okay, what's the problem that we're solving?
Yep.
And in your book, you talk a lot about training and how it's being used, how the technology is being applied. And beyond that, a lot of us might think, or most people might think, oh, these metaphysical or metaverse or meta whatever worlds, they just imagine a headset on my head. But you know how people have been training with the technology for a long time. The military is one of the biggest users of the technology for a very long time. And tell us about some of those capabilities. What are some real world examples of how people are going to be using these technologies in the future? Because you, in some of the chapters, you talk about how some of the companies that are not thinking about this now and preparing for this now are going to be left behind. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think right now with the training stuff, it is mostly in VR headsets. As smart glasses become more popular, some things will shift over to that. Some things you will still need a fully immersive headset. So fully immersive headsets will not go away. Like I have a tech stack of devices, so one will not replace another necessarily. They all have things they do. With the example of training, what I see is a lot of great examples in healthcare, right? From anything from surgical training to patient communication training. I did a piece last year, I directed a piece for a health center in southern Utah on training for emergency situations. So if there's like an earthquake, a flood, something like that, how do you, as the hospital emergency manager, stay calm and then react in a way that also is within the hospital's like legal framework of how you ration care? So like stuff like that, as well as more traditional stuff. It's funny, I teach a lot, and every time I teach, if I'm teaching like exec ed programs, I will often get the same question, which is how does this fit in our industry? So how does this fit in oil and gas? How does this fit in manufacturing? How does this fit in whatever? And I think there are specific use cases for each. However, every company needs good managers. They need good conflict resolution, right? So I think we're going to start seeing more of that. But as this grows, we're also going to start seeing companies that are embracing this technology and then companies that are lagging. And the issue with companies that lag is they can lag for so long and then they just get crushed. The famous example is Blockbuster, right? Blockbuster was top of the world, and Netflix came in and smushed them like a bug. And so
and you know that Netflix went to Viacom at the time, the owner of Blockbuster, and tried to sell themselves to Viacom, and they were like, no, who do you think you are asking us for $50 million? You're not worth that.
Oh my God.
Yeah, oh, Viacom. We could have a separate offline conversation about Viacom, because I've worked there too, and everyone gets chewed up and spit out by that machine. But yeah, I think that, so it's going to be two levels. One is companies that are technology first, beating other technologies, other companies that are incumbents. The second is companies that embrace technology, beating those that don't. If you are in financial services, perhaps, you don't necessarily need to just pivot to being an AI company, but you need to understand how this stuff works and start integrating it, because companies that lag on that are going to have a much harder time, and this stuff will move exponentially faster. And I think people will expect it. At a certain point, expectations just get built for people, right? If a company doesn't have an app, people are confused by that. They're like, where's your app? If they don't have online banking, people are confused by that, right? So I think the idea is companies need to start thinking about this stuff now, because it does take time. There's a lot of pieces. You need to start building, and more than building like a project or a system, you need to create a mindset, a technology first mindset. And that's where the real growth is going to happen.
Is anybody investing in this space right now? You're on the ground, you're seeing everything, you're hearing everything, you're speaking to everybody. Where's the money going?
Oh, it's all AI companies. All AI companies. And it is frustrating because a lot of the big companies are owning the hardware space. And I understand why that is, because of the nature of R&D. It's so expensive that you need those deep pockets. You need those other sort of parts of the business to subsidize that. But it's also frustrating because those big companies can then control everything. And there's always a counterfactual of what happens if Palmer Luckey hadn't sold to Meta, Facebook at the time. Who knows? Literally, who knows what would have happened? But that's always, to me, an interesting question of, okay, what if Magic Leap hadn't fallen apart, right? What if there had been more independent producers of these things? And VCs have shifted away from what they were doing in the 2010s to now they're very focused on a very small niche, and it's these big companies that kind of keep winning. It's pretty hard to get funded, although not impossible. I have a startup I'm advising right now. I met with them earlier. They've started raising some good money. They're in the spatial robotics space, which I think is a really cool space to watch. The digital twins, like what Fei Li is doing out at Stanford, like that is super amazing, cutting edge. I think there's a lot of market opportunity there. I think the smart glasses are going to really be a big thing in the next couple of years. That's what I'm very focused on this year, is how do we get folks building for those? How do we create a language for how to build for those? And how do we start building creative things for those? Because I think the adoption there is going to be relatively quick if they do it right.
Yeah. You talk about there were some failures, but really talk about failure, because I love the way you talk about failure, and then talk about some of the failures that we still know today.
Yeah, so the first part of the book, the first chapter, is really about Web 1.0. And I was in college when that dot-com bubble burst. But my husband, who's in the next room on his own work calls, was in Silicon Valley at the time. So he graduated from college in 95, moved out to the Bay Area to play in a band. and his was a bartender and a musician for a couple of years, just goofing off, having fun. And one of his roommates got a job at a startup and said, "Hey man, you should come work here. It's really fun. There's great perks." And my husband was like, "Okay, why not?" And so he and all of his friends eventually went to work at the startup. They became paper millionaires. Then all of a sudden their paper millionaire money disappeared overnight. They were at a music festival in the UK when it happened, actually off the grid. And so they get back to Heathrow to fly home, and their dot-com bubble bursts on every news channel. And they're like, "Oh no, we're poor." But all that aside, but a lot of people thought at that point, the internet is over. If you look at some of the companies that were the quote unquote biggest failures, pets.com, that's Chewy. That's something everyone uses. My parents use Chewy to buy their dog food. Webvan, that's Instacart, Fresh Direct, whatever your local service is. Cosmo.com, a service that I mightily abused because they didn't have minimums.
So I was like, what? Which was that?
I would be in college in the library studying, and I would order like a single candy bar. So I probably helped bankrupt Cosmo, but anyway, but that's DoorDash. So the idea that, it's fun to tell stories about companies that didn't work out, but I think the idea is that people love to say things are failures, especially now. For some reason, everyone loves to be like, VR is dead, AR is dead, the metaverse is dead, everything's dead. Oh, but everything's back, and everything's dead, and everything's back. And I know there's a content machine that needs to be fed. Thank you, LinkedIn. But stop it, because this is so dumb. Look, everything evolves and changes constantly. The web does not look like GeoCities anymore, and thank God, although I do miss that aesthetic, right? Social networks do not look like MySpace, right? We're not getting seizures and having pop punk bands play at us. But it endures, it exists, it grows, it changes. And so my whole thing is, somebody's like, "Oh, AI hallucinates." And and?
I know, this is the worst it's going to be.
Somebody said something amazing recently, which is Waymo is the most dangerous it will ever be today. Because Waymo is a trainable model. So the fact that Waymo had that weird little glitch in San Francisco when there was a power outage, we'll fix that. So that won't happen again.
Waymo, for people that don't know what Waymo is, because it's not everywhere yet.
Yeah, so Waymo is self-driving cars. Waymo is in Bay Area, Phoenix, LA, a couple other markets. It is coming to New York. They are test driving it in New York. I saw one on the bridge a few days ago, and they're testing it in different markets. I think it's going to be in Atlanta. But Waymo is self-driving cars. Tesla is now doing their self-driving car pilots in Austin. There's a company called Zoox that I was just talking to my friend about that is like these little self-driving pods in the Bay Area. And whoever quote unquote wins, whether it's Waymo or Tesla or Zoox or some combination thereof, and I'm sure car companies themselves will get into this space. Like, these things will just keep improving, right? We've hit the J curve with self-driving cars. We are hitting the J curve very much with AI, right? So everything is trainable, learnable, buildable. I have a whole shelf of headsets above me, and if I pull down my Oculus Rift, great headset for its time, not as good as my Quest 3 that I have sitting up here. Everything is always moving, theoretically. So the idea that any one thing is a quote unquote failure is not something that you can really say. Was Google Glass a success? Did everyone walk around with the Google Glass on their face? No, of course not. It was an absurd project at the time. It shouldn't have gone public like it did. But I've tested the new Google Glasses that are coming out this year, and everyone's going to walk around with one of those things on their faces pretty quick here.
Waymo is everywhere here, so I don't even notice them anymore. That's the thing.
Wow.
Early Waymo, I remember watching girls get out of a Waymo, and the car just kept jerking. My friend and I were walking like, what is happening here? And then the girls just ran away from it, but I haven't seen that since, so they must have streamlined whatever that era was, but it's everywhere here. And it is the future.
I'm so excited for when it comes. I feel like the early days of Uber, it's like you spot one and you're like, what? Where is it? What?
Yeah,
The Google car that's mapping the world. It's like if you saw one, it was like, what?
Yeah. Now we have the little robots for delivery. Do you guys have that?
Not in New York.
Oh, we have them everywhere. They're just walking down the sidewalk with people and their dogs.
Okay, yeah, I see those in LA.
Yeah, and they all have names and eyes. Some of them have eyes.
The ones that are on the ground?
Yeah, they have names. I don't know, Raymond is dropping off at this address. The guy, Raymond.
So there's a whole other, I don't think we have the time and space to get into it in this episode, but there's a whole other conversation about like how we anthropomorphize and humanize robots.
Yeah.
And how we need like googly eyes on things. But
robots, I don't know if it's Japan, China, Korea, somewhere in Asia, they're actually competing. They put them in ranks to compete with each other.
Oh yeah.
That is hilarious.
Like wrestling robots. It's insane.
Wow.
And then they have dance championships with robots. It's a whole other world out there.
There was a great one in Russia where the robot just stumbled and flailed around, this humanoid robot, and I was just like, oh man, that's
I know, I saw that. I have a question for you about when it comes to kids and technology, because you did write this in your book. And I am a mom. I've got 2 kids. So they're teenagers now, but it was such a struggle, them growing up in technology, because they're boys. They loved it. And maybe girls love it as much, but they definitely loved it. And I remember they put on an Oculus early on and they didn't want to take it off. And they were like 11 years old at the time. So can you talk a little bit about your perspectives when it comes to kids and screens and tech?
So I should say, first of all, I do not have children. So I can speak about this from the perspective of a technologist and someone who's done a lot of research on this, but I am not a parent. Just get that out there, because I know that when I talk to parents about this, their reactions are mixed, to say the least. Some of them are cool with it. Some of them get very defensive. I am really opposed to giving children screens at a young age. Here's the thing. Technology should not be a pacifier. And I think a lot of the time people use it as a pacifier. And I'm very guilty of this, as are most people. I will have a hard day and I'll just scroll TikTok for 15 minutes and just turn my brain off. And I think in small doses, when done by adults, that's fine. The issue is not screens per se, or virtual reality per se, or smart glasses per se, or whatever. It is using it when your kid is bored. So I was waiting in line somewhere recently, and this kid started whining at his mom, and she immediately just handed him the phone. And I was like, that's not okay. Like, kids need to be bored. Kids need to be creative. Kids need to look at a book or look around the store. And my mom, when I was a kid, would be like, find everything in the store that's blue and point at it. Read your book, do a coloring book. Here's a toy, whatever. And so I think the idea of just giving your kid a screen every time they start complaining is not great. And there's a lot of research into why that's not great, right? That's not just me making a value judgment. I think virtual reality for learning and education is fantastic. I've worked on that a lot. But again, that is supervised, that is in small doses, that is meant for education. If your kid is doing the Wordle every day on a smartphone, right, very different than if your kid is watching like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which I don't even know that's a thing children watch anymore, or any sort of blinky, fast cartoon. And it's really sad, because I see these kids that are so tech dependent. I had some kids come visit me over the summer, and we were staying at this house with 7 acres in upstate New York, and it was really fun. It was a beautiful day. And I was like, oh my God, let's go hiking. Let's go exploring. If I'd come to that house as a 9-year-old, I'd be like, I'm going out in the woods. I'll see you 3 hours later. Right. This kid walks in the door. The first thing she asks is, what's your Wi-Fi password? Do you not see like the magical woods around here that you can go explore? She sat on the couch. She stared at her tablet, blinking, screaming loud. And then the second somebody tried to take the tablet away, meltdown. It's like, what are we doing here? And again, like, I'm not a parent, so I can sit here and be critical of that. And I think I have a right to be critical of that in particular, because I do think kids need to be creative. They need to come up with their own ideas, because I think also that's going to be the currency of the future, right? So it's not just like kids need to have cool ideas. It's like rote tasks are going to be done by AI very soon, if not already. So the critical currency will be thought and creativity and leadership. You're not learning those skills. So I think there's a real challenge in how do we teach kids to use technology in a way that's smart, that is educational. I'm not talking about no screens ever. There needs to be a balance. And I think that's where it gets really tricky.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I am not a medical doctor at all. I'm just a mom who knows that kids need to be able to interact with the world and learn other human expressions and get into nature and learn how to socialize. I hope everything works out with this generation, but there's a lot of screening, those experiences that we may have gotten when we were younger. The only thing I'll say, and I don't want to be judgmental, but when I see people pushing their toddler in a stroller and they're on a phone, they would be so much more well off if they just looked around and looked at the dogs and looked at the people. And
that's how they learn to read facial expressions. That's how they learn to have conversations. That's how they learn to interact with other humans. And I do see this with Gen Z and Gen Alpha. A, they're not reading books, which is terrifying. And B, they lack very fundamental social skills. And that's what's really scary, is not so much that, oh, they're watching cartoons or they're playing games. They are doing that at the expense of interacting with people. One thing that I have seen that's interesting, and I've worked on a lot, is AI-powered virtual human avatars in headsets. That way, at least you feel like you're conversing with someone. So I think that could undo some of the damage, is you can practice talking to people and having conversations in a safe space. And I do think Kids learning how to code is amazing. Kids learning how to vibe code is amazing. Kids using AI for research is amazing. Kids using technology for different things is amazing. Going on field trips in VR. There's all these amazing, great use cases. I think we just need to know the difference between that, again, in a controlled environment versus, oh, you're bored.
So you do talk a lot about this on the book as well, like the future of education.
Yeah.
So how do we balance it? Because you do talk about the metaphysical and a future where this technology will become more like an operating system. Like it's just the same way the phones and like all this stuff that back in the day was so disruptive today is part of our daily lives. These technologies will also become part of our daily lives. Kids are gonna engage more with technology in education. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the thing that I focus on the book is really based on this thing called the Texas Alpha School, or I think they're just calling it Alpha School now. But their model is basically rethinking education for the age of AI. The way they work is it's 2 hours every morning of instructor-led teaching. So very similar to what schools are doing today, right? The teacher stands up in front of class, they teach the fundamental skills, they lecture, and then in the afternoon, the students work on their own projects, and they use AI and other technologies to build those projects. The teachers are still there. The teachers are functionally docents. So the teachers are A, making sure everyone's on task and they're actually working and not goofing off, B, to mediate conflicts, and C, to give advice and feedback. That's not like a new model. That's like Oxford University's model, is the teacher is not a lecturer so much as a guide and a docent. And I think that's fascinating because one of the other things that's happening with younger folks is you see a lot of folks who aren't really self-directed. You see a lot of folks who are bored in school because they can't contextualize the learning. They can't learn what they're passionate about. They can't take their learning and apply it to their personal interests. They have this very one-size-fits-all model. And the problem with the one-size-fits-all model is it fits the absolute center, right? So if you're a kid that's really smart and driven, you're going to be bored out of your mind. If you're a kid that struggles with school, you're going to fall behind. If you're a kid that's in the middle, you'll probably be okay. But you're losing a lot of folks on both sides. And so rather than this one-size-fits-all model, which no one seems to like at this point, and this obsession with teaching to tests and testing everything and benchmarking everything against an exam that happens once a year, really looking at how can each student reach their fullest potential and study stuff that they are interested in. And again, it's not like free for all, right? Kids still learn to read, they still learn fundamental math, they still learn how to write, right? They learn the basics, but then they apply those basics in different ways. And I think that is what's really interesting, is taking the fundamental skills and applying them to building a business or writing a book or learning how to be a carpenter, right? You need to know certain things to do each of those. So that's where I really see the future, because I do think, again, in the age of AI, when the rote work is done by machines, being somebody who is self-directed, being somebody who is out ahead of the machines and can differentiate from the machines is going to be the critical currency.
You talk about that the change is actually not top down, which I found very interesting. You think that it needs to happen at frontline level. Talk a little bit more about that, because I don't know if I agree, but I understand what you're saying.
Look, top line needs to be part of it in the sense of they have the budgets and they have the approval process. But I think what you really need to do is empower everyone to create and be excited, because people on top are generally, I'm talking about large organizations, not seeing what frontline people are seeing. So there's this show that was on TV maybe 20 years ago called like Undercover Boss, where the CEO of some company would be a cashier for a day or whatever. And it would always be eye-opening for them because they'd be like, oh, this is actually terrible. Half the time the CEO's, oh, we suck, which I guess good that they came to that conclusion. And then it would always be some heartwarming, here's money for college, which would be great. But the frontline people are the ones who actually can define the problems that need to be solved. So I think that's where it gets more interesting, is when you engage those frontline folks to create and empower them to create, they're the ones that are going to come up with more creative solutions, perhaps. So it's not that C-suite folks shouldn't be involved in creating and doing all this stuff. They absolutely should, but they shouldn't be the only ones. If the only person driving your AI adoption is the CTO of your company, you're not going to do well. You need IT people to say, hey, we need this process in place to be automated. You need buy-in from everyone, because I think the other thing that happens is top-down initiatives often fail because people feel like they weren't consulted or it's not actually solving their problem. So a lot of companies are trying to implement AI solutions and running into a lot of friction because people are like, yeah, we don't want to do this. This is terrible, right? And they just give up. It all comes back to solving problems. And I think you need the frontline people to be defining the problems.
Yeah. Can you give us some predictions? So we have a lot of operators, a lot of people in media and technology listening to this. Some people are wondering, a lot of people are out of work
Yeah.
because it seems like almost everywhere nobody's hiring. This is what we're hearing on the ground. What do you see in the future so that some people can be like, oh, okay, maybe that's an area I can look at?
Yeah, it's a brutal market. And I think there's two sort of interesting things in the market that are true. The first is for young folks, recent college grads, it's a terrible market. The idea that AI is taking those jobs, I think, doesn't really exist, except maybe on the fringes somewhere. I think it's more about companies just wanting to be cheap and not train people and not hire young people. So there's that issue. The second issue that I'm seeing is people who are in their 40s, 50s, who are extremely accomplished, who've risen to the top in their space, are now out. And I think that's even more challenging because those are people who it's much harder to pivot when you're 50 than when you're 25. And you have this huge base of knowledge that no one is actually using. So I think the market right now is just a mess. It seems like it's getting better anecdotally, and I'm hearing that it's getting better. I'm seeing some data that it's getting better, but yeah, it's a brutal mess. I would not encourage anyone to chase like a specific technology to try to be relevant in the market, right? I know people who are like on top AI pioneer lists who are unemployed, right? So I think just being like, I know AI. Yeah, look, if you want to upskill, amazing. I'm not telling you not to, but if you think, oh, I'm going to take the AI MIT online course and that's the magic bullet, I'm sorry, it's not. You should take it. It's a good course. It's very interesting. But I don't think chasing any one technology will unlock any sort of special thing. That being said, I would look at smart glasses. So everything I've seen coming out of CES, 2026 is the year of smart glasses. The displays, Meta Display came out last year. I think they're going to do a new version this year and make a lot of improvements, hopefully. The Google smart glasses are going to be amazing. You've got X-Real, you've got HTC doing the Eagle, you have a bunch of others. Smart glasses, this is going to be the year it ramps up.
So opportunities for people to maybe create content,
Yeah.
build things, build features, like
Yeah.
products around that.
Yeah, or think about how are we using smart glasses in our advertising campaigns if you work in advertising? How are we using it in our warehouse training if you work in a warehouse? Thinking about like how can we use this technology to solve problems? I do think AI will eventually create a lot more jobs than it will get rid of them. I think we're going to go through this kind of dip cycle where there's a lot of churn. And I think what's going to be really interesting is right now we have a job market that is very hyper focused on like siloed roles. So at a lot of large companies, your role is X and you do X. If you try to do Y, the person who does Y will kill you. Like, it's so interesting. I saw this thing on LinkedIn recently where this production company was hiring for a job and they had some of the job specs and then they said, this is not a creative role in big bold letters. And I was like, what are you doing? Like, why couldn't it be a creative role? Why couldn't you do this and also this and
Every
also
job needs to be a creative role right now,
yeah,
especially
exactly.
now.
How many times have you worked in a large company and it's this person does X? This person is a project manager. They manage this project, they manage the slice. And if they want to do anything else, like it's a big ordeal, right? Those type of really hyper silo jobs will not exist. You're going to be hiring people to have, yeah, obviously specific expertise, specific skill sets, but there's going to be so much more room to be a more generalist, to be a bigger practitioner, to learn more. And it's this idea that you want to be flexible, you want to be constantly learning. The number of people who finish their formal education and never learn anything again is like insane. The number of people who like haven't read a book in a year, I'm just like, what are you even doing with your time? So I think it's going to be, we're moving towards a cycle of like lifelong learning, lifelong kind of problem solving. And I think this goes back to what we're talking about with kids, because at the end of the day, one thing we've taken away from kids a lot is independent problem solving. I'm a Gen X kid. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I really did have that idyllic suburban childhood where in the summer, my mom would say, come home when the streetlights turn on.
Same.
And I had a big pack of kids in my neighborhood, and we would ride our bikes, and we would go into the woods, and we would go in someone's basement and play video games for a while. And it was fun, but what we were really learning to do is solve problems. Because first of all, you've got a pack of kids. There's going to be conflicts and we'd have to mediate those conflicts on our own. We'd go into the woods, we'd get lost. How do we figure our way out of the woods? Somebody would fall off their bike. Okay, what do we do? Kids don't have access to these anymore for the most part.
That's so true. Wow.
So what we really need to do is make sure at the end of the day that one of the biggest skill sets people need to have is how do I figure something out? How do I learn something? The amount of time I've worked with young people, I've had interns, I've had young folks on teams, and the sort of like spoon feeding of information Like they will come back to me and say, "Oh, I don't know how to do this." I'm like, "Did you Google it? Did you ask ChatGPT? Did you do some research?" Now, look, I'm not, if I'm like, go do heart surgery, obviously tell me no. But it's this idea of, I can't figure this. I don't know the answer to this. Can I ask? Who can I ask? How can I ask? What can I do? And I think creating that just as a baseline way of being is really important. And that's going to be the big job skill of the future is this, again, self-motivation, independent thought, independent problem solving, coming up with ideas, proving out value, right? That's where people are going to need to really focus and train. And if I was giving advice to anyone in the job market, that's the thing. I would be like, how do I prove out that I'm a creative, independent thinker who can solve things on the fly?
Yeah.
Like, you just nailed so many, Julie.
Yeah, we talk about sometimes the entrepreneurial mindset and how we know how to do, like being a generalist is a superpower because you learn how to do everything. And it doesn't always fit in a big corporation because you're right. If you're supposed to do X but you start doing Y, the Y person's going to kill you. Like, totally. But for us, for anybody like us that are building our worlds around us and we are doing everything ourselves, it remains to be seen if we could ever transition back into a role where we only do one thing.
It's funny. I was talking to somebody recently and I said, oh, I was in journalism and I pivoted to tech. And this woman was like, oh, did you do a certification? Did you do? And I was like, no, I just learned.
Yeah.
And she was just like
learning
blown away by that. And for some more, I'm not a technical person. I know some technical things because I need to know how to talk to developers, but I'm like, I know the basics of Unity, but beyond that, no clue. And so for something like that, you could be self-taught, but it wouldn't hurt to take a class. But for people that are on the creative side of things, like I learned to make VR by watching the head of the VR company I used to work for direct stuff. And we looked over his shoulder, but that wasn't exactly the case because you can't 360, you can't be in the room. So I hid in a bathroom and I watched him and I was like, okay, this is how you make VR.
Yeah, you learn by doing.
Yeah, you learn by doing. And I did a bunch of stuff. Some of it worked. Some of it really did not work. I shoot 360 content still all day long. 80% of it, I'm like, nope, that didn't work. Cool. But you have to have that consistent learning mentality where you're constant. And I think that's what's really been beaten out of people in this era of quarterly reports where, it's not going to show up on the first quarterly report or the 10th quarterly report. It's the 20th one where you're like, oh my God. But it's getting to that report. It's having that space to experiment and having that space to be like, that didn't work. What else can we try? And I think we're just in this really stuck mindset right now of if it doesn't work immediately,
that's it.
And that's what has happened with so many technologies. If something doesn't come out and sell 10 million units day one and there's riots outside the store, then, oh my God, it's over. But that historically really hasn't happened. Even the original iPhone, it sold, but it didn't displace the BlackBerry for a couple of years.
Yeah, I feel like you have to learn. Like kids have to put down the iPads. They have to go out and learn. You only learn by watching other people, shadowing other people, teaching yourself, of course, but being out there. And the world is not going to come to you on your couch with your iPad.
Yeah, I think we need more like mentors and we need more there's a thing in Germany in particular where if you are on a non-academic track, when you want to be a welder or a plumber or whatever, there's a system where you go in and you work with senior welders and plumbers and they teach you, right? It's like that. We need more of that. And whether that's for hands-on physical stuff or more creative stuff or email jobs or whatever, like we just need people to do that for younger folks and to open up those opportunities for people to learn by doing and give them responsibility. It's interesting when we think about like internship programs and how those are essentially just like free labor for companies.
It's hard to get internships not paid anymore.
Yeah, it's hard to get internships these days for kids. A lot of the time you're just making coffee. And I suppose there is a value to learning how to conduct yourself in an office environment. That's potentially an interesting skill for young folks, but I think you need more than that. I think you can't just be like, okay, here's how you work in an office all day and make coffee. I think you need actual skills. And I think because, again, there's been so many cutbacks, the availability of those people who can upskill those young folks, like everyone's doing 3 people's jobs, they don't have time.
Right. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing, upskilling, definitely put in the time to learn, to self-educate. It's not a top-down solution. It's a frontline. It's all of us getting down and dirty, learning, educating, and making sure that kids are not in front of the devices at all times.
Yeah. And I would say also another piece of advice is just build a thing, right? This is an Insta360 camera. cute and little. It's a couple $100 on Amazon. Like, if you want to do that, get one of those and shoot content, right? If you want to build an application for smart glasses, those programs exist. If you want to, my friend and I have vibe coding dates where we just vibe code stuff. We just share our screens and get on Lovable and build websites.
Wow.
I think it's
the website for the Media Machine was built on Lovable.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, Lovable is my favorite thing ever at this point.
That's the new skill I put on my resume now because I'm becoming really good at prompt engineering.
No, I mean, that's the thing. You need to, like, it's interesting. There's this link between, right now, a lot of young people want to be influencers, right? They want to be on TikTok or Instagram, and they want to have that lifestyle, which I find fascinating. I understand why, right? Corporate 9-to-5 work is no longer, you can't even get in. It's no longer stable. It's not that interesting. And look, some people just want to dance on TikTok and sell makeup, and good for them. Like, no problem with that. But I think generally kids need to move away from this idea of like hierarchies and resumes and towards portfolios and building stuff.
Yeah.
And showing that you can be self-taught, showing that you can create. If I were advising young folks today, I would tell them, go build a thing based on whatever industry it's in you want to be in, and show how you solved a problem and show how you thought that through. And like, I have my friend who I do Lovable dates with is interviewing for a job there because he just started sending them all the stuff that he built, and they were like, oh wow, this guy really knows our platform, let's talk to him. And I think there's a lot of value in your worst case scenario is you'll get in somewhere interesting because you've proven yourself to be a builder. Your best case scenario is like what you build becomes a business and you get a yacht or whatever it is.
Love it. I think that's a really good place to end. And this is something that I want to coin, Cortney, just so you know, media systems builders, because I think that's what this new era is going to be about for us in the media space. But I think it's going to be a systems building generation. When we were obviously researching you, the book, and preparing for this, like that's how we see you. You're a systems builder, you're a design builder. More people are going to start thinking about traditional jobs differently because those go away. And then there's this whole era of new jobs that haven't been even designed yet because we haven't designed them yet. That's really exciting. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
Love your book. Love your trajectory. Love what you're doing. Keep getting smarter and bringing that knowledge and insight back to us. This has been lovely, Cortney. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us on The Media Machine. If somebody sent you this, it's because they care about you and your future. The Media Machine is created by me, Johanna Salazar. I'm also the host and executive producer with Julie Kellman Redding, who is also the co-host and editor. See you next time.